Here, resume recording. Got it. Okay, so let's start over. So thank you all for joining us again today. We're, trying to help all of our restaurants and hotels navigate this crisis situation as effectively as possible. Today we've got representatives from Jackson Lewis, Chase Samples, and Rob how do you say your last name, Rob?
Gignilliat.
Okay, Gignilliat, and David Scott Peters, a restaurant expert who some of you may have seen at our marketing and operations conference last summer. So we're just going to go through a few things, what's happening right now, what we know. Rob and Chase will be providing some insight from the employment law perspective, and then David Scott Peters is also going to be providing some restaurant expertise. So let's get started. Here are your hosts for today. So what we know right now, obviously this is an unprecedented situation. This is something that is new to all of us across the country. We're trying to navigate this as effectively as possible using resources such as David Scott Peters and the attorneys at Jackson Lewis, but also the other restaurant and lodging associations from across the nation. Governor McMaster, of course, issued his executive order on Tuesday, which provided more clarity for restaurants and hotels going forward. We do know that some of you have had some questions about the executive order. What we know right now is that effective yesterday, March 18th, the restaurants were to cease dine-in operations until March 31st. That includes all dine-in, even outdoor seating areas. We've had a lot of questions how that relates. All restaurants going forward for the time being are to do dine out, carry out, take out, curbside pickup, and delivery right now. Chase and Rob will be speaking a little bit more about the county and city ordinances, and I'll pass it off to them right now.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Chase Samples. This is Rob Gignilliat beside me. Good to be with you. There were a lot of, before the governor issued his executive order, there was a lot of activity on the local level, but what we've seen is since we've got that statewide order come out, cities and counties have basically modified their orders to comply with what the governor has done. So there's really for example, in the city of Greenville yesterday, the city council passed a resolution that basically says that we're going to comply with Governor McMaster's executive order, except to the extent it's unclear whether the governor's executive order includes bars that don't serve food and nightclubs. We're going to include those groups as well. So it's maybe arguably a little broader, but I do think the governor's executive order was intended to cover bars and nightclubs already. So basically what we're seeing is the municipalities are falling in line with the governor, and the governor is going to be the one, I think, going forward to be the party issuing the bad news if and when this gets extended. And then Rob will talk a little bit later on in the presentation about what Congress did last night and what the president signed last night, which was pass the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And we'll get into that in more detail in a few minutes.
Okay, David, I'll pass it off to you.
Sure. So I want to welcome everybody. This is probably the most difficult time I've ever seen in my lifetime for hospitality. My heart goes out to everybody. We're going to try and do our best to provide you information, help you weather this storm. We hope life gets back to normal as soon as possible, but we already know there's irreparable damage. And a lot of us have to learn how to navigate this new world we're living in. And what I want to talk about a little bit is, I get it. I feel your pain, but not as much as you do. I feel the fear. I feel the stress, just like you do. But again, probably not as much as you do, because you're trying to look at yourself and say, you realize that we're in an industry of cash flow. And what do I mean by that? It means as sales come in, we're able to pay our bills, right? No problem. Well, we're cash flow based. What happens is overnight, you've got we've got these regulations that force us to go to curbside delivery, to go. And maybe we're a full service fine dining restaurant. That's never been our gig. And all of a sudden our sales drop like this. Well, we've accrued payroll from last week when sales were higher. And we've got to pay it right now, which means unless we've had cash put aside enough for this, which we couldn't foresee, it puts us in a cash bind right away. And we start wondering, how long will this last? How do I survive this? How do I change over to the now delivery if that's not been your thing? And so what I'm going to do is try and provide you the best information I can. And it changes every day. What it was 2 weeks ago, what it was early on this week on Monday or Sunday, and what it is today is completely changing. It just changes and changes and changes. So that's why it's so important that you participate in things like this, that you've got a proactive restaurant association that cares about you and is getting you the most up-to-date information and bringing you experts to help you navigate this. So our landscape has changed. We're now forced to be delivery. We're forced to be takeout or curbside. Now, depending on your operation, how easily or hard that is going to be for you is a lot to do with whether you've already embraced the fact that delivery is here, meaning the delivery apps. So I can tell you right now, if you've been fighting the Uber Eats of the world because you said, hey, I don't need that, I don't want that or whatever, well, now you've got to have it. And I'm in fact going to tell you today, in order for you to survive this, to get all your guests to know that you are doing delivery, you need the top 4 in your marketplace. Now, I can tell you nationwide, that's Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Postmates. So those are tend to be the 4, and they're reacting to us. I know for a fact as right now, at least on social media, Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber Eats have said they're waiving the fees. They're feeling our pain. They're waiving the fees. I'm going to assume Postmates. I couldn't find it. I hadn't seen anything pop up in any of my feeds. But the fact of the matter is, they are reacting. Now, why do we need all 4? Well, number one, you're not going to go out if you've not done delivery, if you're not been typically a pizza place or Jimmy John's or somewhere else that already has their own delivery put together. You're not going to go out and create that. We got to worry about insurances and all these other things that go into place. We don't have the systems in place, so we need these apps. Well, in my phone, I've got DoorDash. Okay. Well, I've got a friend of mine who's got Uber Eats. I've got another friend who's got Postmates. Got another friend who's got Grubhub. And the fact of the matter is, that means this is the world. I'm in the world of DoorDash. Doesn't mean it's better or any different than any of the other ones. It's just the one that I have on my phone. I don't need all 4. Well, I need all 4 worlds to live in, because if here's this group of customers, this group of customers, this group, and this group, we want all of them. So you need to start thinking about right now, this moment, signing up for all 4 of the largest ones in your area. Odds are they are these 4, the largest ones in the nation. Next is we got to make it easy for our customers to order from us. We need online ordering. So I don't have any apps to recommend for you. There's so many out there. What I am going to tell you is the person you call is your POS dealer. You say, hey man, I've got your POS. What apps, what software, what other platforms are you connected with? Because I want my customers, I want to be able to add it to my website like that and have it immediately go to my POS system seamlessly. And I don't need a 90-day setup period. I've got to be able to get this going right now. So go talk to your POS dealer. Now, why is that important? Well, we want to make sure that there are people who are frightened, right? It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of what you believe or disbelieve. The fact of the matter is there are people frightened and they don't really want to exchange money. So by allowing me as a customer to order online, comes down to you. I can come out, whether it's curbside or I walk in the door, I don't have to exchange cash, credit card. Heck, I might even have to touch your door handle, and I can get the food and I get right out of there. And so we want to provide that convenience, that feeling of safety, right? We want to make sure we don't lose sales, because anybody else who makes it easier for them to order, to get in and out, that's where they're probably going. So let's be on top of that. Next, let's talk about marketing. First thing I got to tell you is you need to have an email list. So if you don't have an email list right now, then I can't help you in that respect, because the first thing I can do is email all my customers and say, hey, we're open, we're here. Now, you also need to get out that one message that everybody you've ever done business with, that you're on their email list, haven't they sent you their coronavirus This is what we're doing. Email that says, this is what we're doing to protect you, and here's what we're doing to protect our employees. So get that out there. Tell them in there that you're ServSafe certified. Let's grab that logo, post it on our front door, put it on our website, throw it in every email, put it in every social media post. Hey, we are ServSafe. Talk about how you have brought in people just to make sure all hard surfaces are wiped down on a routine basis, from door handles, windows, cash presenters, pens. What are you doing that you've implemented a hand washing system that every 15 minutes our employees must wash their hands, and it is on a checklist, and there's a manager inspects it? What are you doing to make me feel comfortable that you're doing everything in your power to keep my place safe? But then on the marketing side is, tell me you're open. Tell me I can still get that incredible burrito, that pizza, that steak, whatever it may be, that you are still there. So now we've got to start doing a lot of social media. Now, I can tell you, you've got to really think about who your demographic is, but you probably have to be on Facebook. You probably have to be on Instagram. You probably have to be on Twitter. But anywhere, depending on your demographic, where they are, where they put their time into social media, you've got to be on there. You've got to be promoting. Hey, we've got curbside. We're still here. Hey, we use Uber Eats, DoorDash. We're still here. And you've got to do this probably multiple times in a day. Because in a good economy, when life is good, it's hard enough to get a message like that out there. Now we've got all these people that are home, and they've got to make a decision if they break out of their house from social distancing to go get something. Do they feel safe, and who do they go to? Who's still open? And you've got to navigate that. Now, if you do not know social media, there's people old like me who that might not be your thing. Well, you can no longer make it an excuse that that's not my thing. Because otherwise, how the heck are we going to get a message out to people, right? We've got to get it out right away. So I'm going to give you 3 resources that I have no affiliation to. I don't make a commission on, nothing. These are people I believe in, that I know can do a good job for you. So if you need social media marketing, you can go to Repeat Returns. They can take care of you. Moving Targets, they can take care of you. And GoDaddy Social, which used to be Grub Street, I think it was called, they bought them. So again, Repeat Returns, Moving Targets, and GoDaddy Social. Those would be 3 that I tell you will do a good job for you, affordable, and I feel very comfortable recommending them. Next, talk about packaging. Now in this world of to-go, delivery. Well, I used to be a franchisor, 30-unit restaurant sports bar chain here in Arizona. And we had this most incredible pastrami sandwich, put it on a flat top, just phenomenal, buttered toasted buns. We had hand-cut French fries. I mean, this stuff is so good, just stop your heart. Well, it's incredible when you dined in. Now, this is almost 20 years ago. We'd put it in a styrofoam container. We didn't have the technology we have today for to-go containers, so it would go in styrofoam. By the time it got to somebody's house, it was like a rainforest inside. The fries were soggy. The bun was soggy. It was just a crappy product, even though it was phenomenal if you dined in. So you've got to think about this. By the time it gets to their house, that is you. So you've got to make sure, are we using the right product, or are we being conscious? So for instance, maybe your demographic really has fought you and you don't have the turtle killers anymore, right? That's a plastic straw, right? And you go, well, if they don't want plastic straws, you think they're going to be really happy that they're coming to your place and you've got all the styrofoam going out, right? Are we looking at paper products that soak up grease? Maybe I could take my French fries and put them in paper bags, and parchment paper for my sandwiches, or I've got certain containers that are biodegradable and renewable resources and so on. Be very clear with your sales rep. Contact them, say, hey, what's the right thing to get this food out there? Because you've got to make sure that you're delivering now, not in your store, but in their home. Next, menus. This is going to be a big one for most people. Some of us, let's say I'm a steakhouse. I gave that example earlier. I'm like, but quite honestly, am I going to drive to a steakhouse to go? Because I like my steaks medium rare. I like them really, pink to a little bit of red. But that steak keeps cooking. So if I live 15 minutes away, now it is getting more done. Now maybe you'd argue that not that much, but by the time I get home, I got to heat it up. And do most people have skill sets or a grill to throw it out there, or they throw it in a microwave and now they're killing the product? So I may have to say, you know what, I've got to find something within what fits my restaurant that's not a steak. So maybe it's, I'm going to be doing incredible shaved beef sandwiches. Maybe I'm going to be doing a steak tartare or something, chefy things, right? Get creative. What fits my concept that I can do that travels well, that people will travel for, right? Now, with that said, I want you to reduce your menus. Think about it. If you've got 40, 50 menu items and your customer counts drop overnight, right? We no longer have bottled beer, draft beer, wine, liquor sales. We've got food, that's it. And our customer counts, we may see 50% drops, 75% drops in sales, depending on how much we market and whether we've got a strong customer base. And we said that we've got to make it. Well, now I want to get that menu list down to 10, 15, 20 items that you rock and roll. Like you are so good at that when it hits my house, I always love it. And now I can reduce the number of cooks, meaning they can do more things, right? I don't have to man every station, and they can do it over and over and over again every single day. So I have consistency. I've got good product. Oh, I've got fresh product. See, one of my concerns right now for many of us is that as the mandate comes in and we've got to change our business, what about all that food we have on the shelves that's dated? Now, some of it might be able to go to food bank, but what if I could sell it, right? And if I could get it off the shelves, maybe I slowly reduce my menu so that once that product, that special product is off my shelf, I don't order it again. I only order things. So if I get my inventory skewed down, I can have more consistency, run with less cooks. I can have fresher product, not lose product, which costs me money, right? And so all of a sudden, there's so many advantages to doing so. Now, I want to add a couple other things. I want you to think about meal replacement. So I've got a good friend of mine, Sandy Corum, thecateringcoach.com. She has 2 retail stores and a catering business as well called The Festive Kitchen in Dallas, Texas. She has 2 retail stores where she sells her catering to go. Basically, they're prepped dishes that somebody can finish at home. So it might be a lasagna that feeds 4, 5, 6. It might be a chicken salad they scoop. It might be a dip. It might be whatever, all these different things. Well, could you create a family meal that is a lasagna that is partially baked, right, in a tin, and with instructions how to finish it off with, it comes with a Caesar salad, croutons on the side, dressing on the side, everything on the side, along with breadsticks and butter or whatever it may be. And if they come in, they can order the family thing. Now it's maybe more shelf stable. Maybe it's a frozen product that they've got to go through instructions at home, whatever it may be. And so it gives you the ability to get a larger ring at the register and take care of people because they're hunkered down. I've got a family of 4. How do I feed them? And especially when you look at the grocery stores. Now, I don't know, it's hard to believe that nobody in the news has picked up on this or nobody else has talked about it, but it was something like 20-something years ago, we saw a shift. When I grew up as a kid, and I'm 53 years old, you went out to dinner, it was a big deal once a week, like even to McDonald's, like, man, we're going to McDonald's, right? And as the years went on, this was our spending in the grocery store, and this is our spending in a restaurant. We did this. We spend more than 50% of our take home on food out in restaurants. Don't we love that? That's exactly what we want. Well, there's a reason why the grocery stores are getting slaughtered right now, because we're being crippled, right? So the customer is moving back to a grocery store. They're not prepared for that kind of volume. We've got the food. So how do we get it back in their hands? Let's create some meal replacement opportunities for them. And last but not least, when it comes to food, their menu is, can you look at drop-off catering? Barbecue concepts have been great about this. Italian restaurants are great about this. This is where you get your aluminum foil chafing dishes, and they're filled with baked ziti or pulled pork, and you've got another one with buns and barbecue sauce in squeeze bottles, and you can drop it off because there are still some companies that have people working, and there's no place for them to go to work. They're trying to do their very best or to go to lunch. They're trying their best to accommodate them. Now, depending on where your numbers are in your state, right? But nationally, we went from 250 to 50 to earlier this week, no gatherings more than 10. And so can I feed 10 people very easily? So you have an opportunity with that drop-off catering. There's also households with college kids that are home, with young kids that are home, with people are working from telecommuting, and you might be a great change that you can drop off catering. It's an opportunity. Can you add that? Now it goes back to that social media. You've got to somehow communicate it. And last but not least, I want to finish up with the one thing I should have started with, but it's the one that shuts people down. It's the hardest one to talk about. You got to have a budget. This is a difficult time. I always tell people the two most important systems any restaurant should have in place are budgets and recipe costing cards. Well, let's focus on budgets. Well, I know right now, the last thing you're thinking about is I want to create a budget, especially for a year, because it's uncertain. What does next week look like? At this matter, we don't know what next month looks like. And it's an uncertainty that is kind of difficult, really difficult for us. Do I stay open? Do I lay people off? What do I do? So this budget tells you. What I want you to think about is forget about a 12-month budget. Let's look at a 12-week budget. And we're going to create a scenario, and we're going to make it a cash flow budget. We're going to put our reality in that our sales have dropped 50, 75%. What does your new reality look like? If you've got 1 day in this new reality, 2 days in this new reality, let's just extrapolate that as that's what sales look like for right now. And so we put those sales in. Then we look at our sales categories. We're probably not selling bottled beer, draft beer, wine, liquor, right? Might not even be selling NA beverage. It's just food. So I've got one category to manage, one category to sell. I've got cost of goods sold. I've got my labor, and my labor, I have to look at it as probably a fixed expense. We're going to be in a situation where we're back to where we opened, or we're out of season, and we have minimum staffing levels. You know, it might be the time that survival mode is as an owner. You've got yourself back in your business, working the line, because you're doing whatever it takes, Herculean effort to survive this. Your managers may be converted from salary to hourly, and you want to keep them employed, and they are doing the line jobs. And then we are getting everybody in. But we're going to have this fixed expense instead of variable. We don't know what sales are going to be like, but I need one cook. I need one or two people up on a register, or servers taking orders and delivering, whatever it may be. And so we look at that. Then we look at every line item on our P&L. What week we pay for it, because we're doing 12 weeks. So when I pay the bill, and we start to look at what we're going to make or lose based on our new reality in sales, cost of goods sold, and labor. And we say, how much money did I put aside? And so you start to say, maybe I'm in a position where I need to start deferring, right? Because cash is incredibly important. I told you, we're cash flow based. So if our sales drop and we're paying payroll that is still up here from when I was busy, we're already at a deficit. And so we've got to start to concern about our cash. We can start to look at things like, we got to make payroll. Federally, got to pay people. We've got our payroll taxes. Well, you've got to look at that. You got to pay that one for the employees, but maybe we talk to your CPA, see what the state is doing, see what the federal is doing. Can I defer my employer taxes? I wouldn't recommend it, but that's something to look at. Sales tax. You are getting some relief on sales tax, and I'll let our attorneys talk about that a little bit, but you've got the ability, I think it's a 3-month window, if I remember correctly, that says, okay, I can push that off. But do know that that is a hole we're digging. If we don't pay that, you still have to file. You still have to make sure that the paperwork's in, but you're going to owe money later. Just remember, as we defer payments, we're digging a bigger hole. Now we start to look at our rent. We start to look at and say, hey, landlord, you need to work with me. I'm going to not pay you. I've got to make it through here. Now, your landlord, just remember, they're a business too. They're going to be in crisis mode. But we're going to expect that possibly there's relief. Believe it was 2008 in the recession. The federal government put out, the ability, you can't be kicked out. You get like a 4-month reprieve. So maybe I can hold that back. I'm going to talk to my broadline distributors. Understand that your broadline distributors, if you're hurting and they're looking at all these restaurants, they're hurting by 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 times you are. And so you want to communicate. Don't bury your head in the sand and say, hey, is there any way if I make partial payments, can you keep delivering to me? And odds are they'll work with you. Don't bury your head in the sand. Also talk to them on a side note. They've got dated product in their coolers right now based on huge numbers. That's disappeared. They're probably going to have deals to move fresh product out that it doesn't die. So be asking those questions. So talk to them. Can I defer some of those things if I'm not already on credit with them? And then line by line by line, who do I pay? Who do I get rid of? Because now is your opportunity. Maybe it's a blessing for some of us to give up some of our bad habits. It's your blessing to start over, to look at everything we do in our business, get rid of the dead weight, and really focus on what makes a difference in our business. And so if you can put that 12-week cash flow budget, you create scenarios. What if sales are here? What if sales are here? What if sales are here? And then you ultimately look at the end of the 12 weeks and you decide whether or not that hole is too big to climb out of, whether it makes sense, I lose money being open, but I lose more being closed, or vice versa. I lose more being open, I lose less being closed. And then do I plan to reopen? Now, there are some options. They're offering the SBA loans. My understanding is through other restaurateurs at those sites like unemployment and SBA and all these things are crashing because there's so many people going on them, but there's opportunity. But do I want to borrow money? Right? We want to look at, is there assistance? And I can't wait to hear what, because I went to bed last night, woke up this morning, know that there's a sign, but I don't know the details. The gentleman with us will know the details of the relief bill. For the first time in my life, the government is looking at actually bailing out the hospitality industry, the #1 employer in the United States. First time ever. What does that look like? Is it the proposals of paying people as if they were still employed? Is it relief for us to have insurance for being closed? Because most of us have insurance for that, for business interruption insurance, which isn't covered based on what's happening right now. So it's a scary time. So you put this cash flow budget together, you get to the end of that 12 weeks and we create different scenarios. And that's how you decide if I've got to lay people off, whether I close my doors, whether I stay open, convert to this. And that's what we've got to do. Here's the deal. In parting, before I finish, is I want you to think about this. I feel your pain. It is uneasy. It is frightening. It is very difficult. And every service that helps restaurants, everyone is sharing this pain. As entrepreneurs, we've got to remember we can have, and this is my belief, you can have one day that we feel bad for ourselves. Heck, we can cry. We can feel just absolutely horrible. It's the next day. What we do defines us as entrepreneurs. Your employees need you to lead them. Even if it's, hey, people, we've got to share the pain and we don't have a bar open anymore. I'm sorry, bartenders, I've got to let you go. They want certainty too. They need you to lead. And this is your opportunity. While it's not the one you've ever wanted, but now's the time to make sure that you look at your business and make good decisions. Lenza, that's what I have for you.
Thanks, David. So next we're going to go back to Rob and Chase to talk about closures, furloughs, and layoffs.
Sure. So we know from our experience that you are thinking about these issues. Some of you may have already, probably a lot of you have already gone through layoffs and furloughs and are considering closures. I'm on a team right now that's helping clients across the country with these issues. And, you know, as David has pointed out, there are many people in the same boat that you are. You're not alone. We're receiving a lot of requests about these issues. We understand how painful of a time this is for you and your employees. As he said, take that painful day. Next day, let's get up. Let's make a plan. Let's also consider the legal issues that are going to be implicated when you're going through this process. So I'm at least going to give you a way to spot some of the problem areas, things you need to be aware of. One very common sense thing, not a legal issue. If you have to lay off employees, cut their hours, treat them with respect. You know, be compassionate. We know you're going through a lot too. The employees are going through a lot. You know, a major reason that people go see a plaintiff's lawyer is because they feel disrespected during their termination. They feel slighted. So keep that in mind. If you could hit the next slide for me.
Oh, yep, got it.
So one issue I just want to highlight is when you're deciding whose hours are going to get cut, who's going to get laid off, you need to have some kind of objective criteria for choosing employees and just be aware of potential protected groups. You don't want to have, you know, a larger impact on women or racial groups, older employees. You know, maybe you're thinking older employees shouldn't be working right now. We need to protect them. That's not a good basis for a decision. Something you can think about, but it would advise you against. So think about your selection criteria, maybe do it by, length of service or performance or something other that you can objectively measure. Warn notices, both on the federal level and at the state level in some states, but not in South Carolina, there are notice requirements where you're required to provide notice to the employees who are affected and to various government agencies. In South Carolina, there's no state law, but you still have to comply with the Federal WARN Act. The potential penalties for not complying are extremely severe. And if we're talking about a large number of employees who are impacted, it's usually the plaintiff's lawyers will file it as a class action, and we're talking about millions of dollars in exposure for a large group. So, this is a serious issue. It may not impact many of you who have very small operations, but let me give you kind of the criteria to figure out when there is a trigger and you have to give notice under the federal law. It's site specific. So you're going to look at each site individually as to how many layoffs there are. And the threshold federally is 50 employees. That includes both terminations and cutting hours by 50% or more. So you've got to think about that too when you're, taking everyone down from 30 hours to 15 hours. You include full-time employees towards the threshold. So, maybe a lot of you have part-time employees that aren't going to count. It's defined at 20 hours or less. So you can, if prior to all of this, they were working 20 hours or less, then you don't need to count them towards the 50 employee threshold. If it's truly a temporary layoff that's going to be less than 6 months, then it doesn't count. What I'll say about that though is that right now, we don't know how long any layoffs are going to last, how long furloughs are going to last. If it ends up being extended beyond 6 months, then you're still on the hook. And so I am telling clients, do not rely on that, because you're supposed to give notice as soon as it's reasonably foreseeable if it's a temporary layoff situation. So I would try not to rely on that exception since there's so much at stake in exposure. You're supposed to provide notice 60 days in advance under the federal law. Obviously, no one can do that right now. It's not possible. There's an exception for unforeseeable business circumstances. Everyone that I've talked to agrees that that applies right now. But that's not a get out of jail free card. And that's not you don't have to issue any notice. You still have to issue the required notices as soon as possible. So be aware of that. If you're operating in multiple states outside of South Carolina, some of the states have lower thresholds, 25 employees, you count part-timers, there's no exception for temporary layoffs. So keep that in mind. I'm gonna knock off 2 of the next points in one, which is COBRA notices and benefits issues. You need to think, if you offer any benefit plans, group plans, health insurance, or other plans, short-term disability, life insurance, retirement, anything like that, you need to check your plan language, work with your HR people, review the terms of the plan. There may be notice requirements that are implicated when employees dip below a certain number of hours or when they're terminated. It's going to affect notice issues, your contributions to the plan, and just be wary of that. specific to health insurance, there's the COBRA issue, and employees that are kicked below a certain number of hours, may be entitled to continued coverage. You need to issue notices. You need to offer them the continued coverage if you're covered. Unemployment claims. I've heard that many of you have questions about unemployment issues. I think that y'all were sent out a little FAQ by the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce. People are potentially going to be covered for layoffs, reductions in hours under the South Carolina unemployment law for benefits. South Carolina has not changed the rules. Like there's a 1 week waiting period, for example. Other states are changing the rules. There is a process that SCDU has set up for you to essentially submit an application so that you can file a claim for all of the employees being laid off. And that way, the employees don't have to each individually file claims. And SCDU is asking employers to do that to help out, essentially. Real quick on immigration issues, if you're terminating anyone who's on a temporary visa, there may be issues related to that, notice requirements, so keep that in mind. We do have a wage payment act in South Carolina. If you're changing someone's regular hours, if you're changing their rate of pay, you need to provide 7 days notice in writing in advance. Try to do it. We understand it may not be feasible, but that's what's required under the law. So, there may be a little blip of exposure there. Final paychecks need to be processed either within 48 hours or usually will apply by the next regular pay period. And definitely you're not allowed to get past 30 days. Other states, if you're operating multiple, states, may have other requirements: paid sick leave, termination notices, more advanced notice requirements. And so just be mindful of that if you're operating outside of South Carolina. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chase.
All right, thanks, Rob.
For pay reduction.
So, we recognize, excuse me, the reality that a lot of folks on the call have already let folks go, but some of you on the call are hanging in there and saying, look, I want to try to keep my employees, but there's no way I can keep them and pay them what I was paying them before all this happened and when things, when times were good. Can I reduce their pay? And that's a question I've gotten several times this week from hospitality clients, especially regarding salaried employees. So let's take the salaried employees first. Can you reduce their pay? And the answer is yes. We typically don't advise doing it often, but as long as they're receiving at least $684 a week, which is the federal threshold now to qualify for the salary basics exemption, as long as they're receiving that $684 a week, then yes, you can reduce their salary. You just can't dip below that $684, and you can keep them exempt. Now, one thing I would caution you is if this was a supervisor who was supervising a lot of employees who are no longer there, you could run into issues with the duties that person's performing. So, for example, with the executive exemption, as it's known, you've got to be supervising 2 or more full-time employees. So just be sure that's still the case. If not, then you might ought to consider switching them over to hourly and paying them overtime because they might be non-exempt. Non-exempt folks, can you reduce their pay? Yes, you can. Again, for non-exempt folks, you're just bound by the federal minimum wage in South Carolina, which is $7.25 an hour. You got to pay them at least $7.25 an hour. With the tip credit, that's going to create some issues for folks, especially for keeping servers who are making, below $7.25 an hour, and you were taking a tip credit for those folks. If those tips aren't coming in, then you're going to have to adjust their pay at least to minimum wage to make sure you're not running into any issues there with the minimum wage statute. I imagine most folks on this call don't have a lot of folks who are working at home. Maybe you do. Maybe you have some administrative folks, HR folks, or some of our hospitality clients might have more folks working at home. Just a couple of quick things on work from home. Obviously, for non-exempt folks who are working from home, we still have to pay them for the hours they work. So make sure you have good procedures in place for them to track their time, report their time, and get paid for that time. One question we're getting is whether we have to reimburse employees for business-related expenses that they incur from working at home. And the answer for hourly non-exempt folks is you generally do not, as long as they're receiving at least minimum wage by the time they pay for those own expenses. So if they're making $7.25 an hour, then you've got to pay them for any business-related expenses that they incur at home. For salaried folks, we typically advise that you do cover those expenses just so that you don't run into any issues with the salary requirement. I think that's it for pay issues. So, short answer, can you reduce pay? Yes, you can. Just be careful about doing it. And if you're going to reduce pay, as Rob mentioned a moment ago, South Carolina has the Payment of Wages Act that requires 7 days advance notice before any pay reductions go into effect. So you want to get that notice out as soon as possible if you're considering pay reductions. All right, next slide. So keeping your staff safe. David may have some good practical thoughts here, but I'll address the legal questions and then let David weigh in on some of the practical things. But for a lot of you don't have as many staff as you did a few days ago even. But those of you who are on the call hopefully are still open and still have some staff. So how do we keep them safe when we're in this coronavirus world? Obviously, the CDC and South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control are two great resources. Their websites are updated almost daily with the latest sanitation guidance and advice. So I encourage you to take a look at those. I'm sure you probably already have, but just be familiar with those. From a legal standpoint, we're getting a lot of questions about handling requests for time off, whether it be for somebody who's experiencing symptoms, somebody who's going to stay home and care for somebody with symptoms, or somebody who's just generally concerned about what's going on and they don't want to be in public right now. I've been advising clients across industries to be lenient, more so than you normally would when it comes to handling requests for time off, especially in our industry where we're experiencing a decline in demand for the most part. I'm sure most of you are. You've got a little more flexibility to accommodate folks' requests for time off. So I would just encourage you to be generous there in terms of granting time off. Now, in South Carolina, there's no requirement to have paid time off. If you previously had a plan that provided for paid time off, then you need to comply with the terms of that plan. If somebody has built up vacation days, they can certainly use those days. But there's no requirement to provide paid time off. Now, I'll let Rob address the new law because that did change things a little bit that was passed last night. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. What if an employee seems sick at work? Can I send them home? The answer is yes. If folks are experiencing symptoms of coronavirus at work, you most definitely can send them home.
And should.
And should. And should. That raises, maybe I'll just jump to the last question because I've actually had this come in overnight. I had 2 clients reach out to me and said, hey, I've had an employee test positive. What do I do? And one of those was in the restaurant setting. So in the restaurant setting, I would say the first thing you want to do is obviously send that employee home if they're at work. Tell them, you don't come back to work for 14 days. You've got to quarantine yourself. But I would also notify the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control and get them involved. That does a couple things for you as an employer. It gives you some protection for whatever actions you're going to take later because you're doing it with the guidance and under the auspices of the Department of Health and Environmental Control. So if they tell you, look, you're going to have to shut down your business for a couple of days, you're going to have to hire a sanitation crew, come in and sanitize everything, then you want to have a good reason for doing so. I would try to determine in conjunction with DHEC the exposure for other employees. So one of the things you're probably going to need to do if you do have somebody who tests positive is send home other employees who've worked closely with this employee for 14 days and see if they develop symptoms. There's some good guidance out there on the CDC's website that talks about exposure. It was just updated in the last day or so as this has continued to spread in the US, that talks about low, medium, and high risk situations and what you can do with folks in certain categories. Somebody who was working closely with somebody who's tested positive is going to be in the medium risk category, and you as the employer can send those folks home. You also want to let folks in your workplace know that someone has tested positive for coronavirus. Now, under the ADA, you don't want to disclose that person's identity. I mean, I recognize the reality is, especially in a lot of small workplaces, everybody's going to know who's got it. But you as the employer don't want to be the one conveying that information and sharing that information. So just be mindful of that. And I would recommend retaining a qualified vendor to come in, sanitize, clean things. It may mean you need to stay closed for a limited period of time, but you want to do that and obviously take those precautions, because we don't want to be contributing to the spread of this virus. It's already done enough damage to our industry. We want to take the lead in fighting it and getting it under control. So that's
Chase, can I interject a question for you?
Go ahead.
So I get it. They're telling us, and there are going to be some people who, I mean, we all know this. We're in an hourly employees. They need their paycheck, right? And so they may be feeling ill. And this just happened. My son is a Marine here in Yuma, in Arizona, and one of the Marines went in and didn't tell people they were sick. And next thing you know, there's a whole department where my son is in. They're all quarantined now because they think they've got to wait the 14 days. And because he didn't want to say something. Well, in our industry, a lot of people don't want to say I'm sick. I mean, think about how many bartenders, cooks, people have shown up, just allergies, I'm good, whatever. So if I identify somebody and they don't look quite well to me, this is a question I've been asked in the past, and that is, can I take their temperature?
It's a very good question. And the guidance on that has actually changed within the last 2 weeks. If you had asked me, can I take their temperature before we had this pandemic, the answer would have been no. That's a medical examination under the ADA, and it's still a medical examination under the ADA. So we generally advise against it, but there's some new guidance that's out from the EOC really within the last couple of days that says that you actually can, to the extent you're concerned about somebody having coronavirus specific, because the WHO has declared it to be a pandemic. There's a little bit of flexibility in the law that we didn't have before. You actually can take the person's temperature. I would just caution you to be very careful about doing that. Do it sparingly. And
it almost be worth them just to go, you don't look well, I'm sending you home, not even go through the process.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Under the circumstances, that's definitely the safer course. But if you have questions, if that comes up, the EOC's website has a Q&A has some really good tips and talks about how far you can go with something like that.
Let me just, I'm gonna hijack you again, because this is important. This is great information. And I'm going to say a typical independent restaurant owner doesn't have attorneys like you in their back pocket. Like there's never been in their brains a need. Now there's always a need. There's hiring, firing, discrimination, harassment. There's always a need to have a professional like you. If they don't have a professional and they're finding themselves, I need questions answered, do you guys have capacity to take on new clients? Because quite honestly, if it were me, the fact that you understand this, clearly I can see you understand this. Clearly you've got a relationship with the Restaurant Association and understand restaurants and restaurateurs' needs. Like if I'm in a position to go, man, I need advice, because I know a lot of the things, you may get some questions that you can't answer specifically if you don't know a whole bunch of information about them specifically on this call. Are you guys can you take on people? Do you have capacity? Because it's crazy out there right now.
Yeah.
Our because the courts have slowed down, our litigation practice has slowed down a little bit. And so we are focusing all of our efforts on advising companies on how to deal with this. So, we've trained people up, I've luckily been doing some of this reduction in force work for a while, but we have teams in place for specific, the medical issues, the reduction in force issues, and we are creating that capacity and moving a little bit away from litigation so that we can help people right now.
Yeah, and
So-
so yes, most definitely. And one other thing I would say, David, even before this arose, Jackson Lewis has partnered with the South Carolina Restaurant Lodging Association to provide a labor law hotline. If folks have a question, basically we'll give you 10 minutes of free legal advice if you take
That's great.
advantage of the hotline. So Linza will distribute some information about that. You guys have probably seen it in some of the monthly newsletters, but maybe not paid that much attention to it. But now's a great time. We'd love to talk to you if it winds up being a bigger issue. Of course, we'd love to have a longer term relationship with you and help you out.
So let me tell everybody. Here's the deal. As I've worked with thousands of independent restaurants all over the United States for the last, since 2003. And I'm going to tell you, it is not if, it's when an issue pops up. And now we're in such shaky times that, again, how many of us ever knew? I'm going to tell you right now, this week alone, working with different restaurant associations and as they've talked about the WARN law, right? The requirements for WARN, like where did that come from? And the thing about it is the government doesn't care if you don't know. We're supposed to know. We're supposed to know ADA. We're supposed to know the Age Act, Discrimination Act. We need to know. We have to know these things. And if you don't know, ignorance is not bliss. So I'm gonna tell you, it's worth. You've got a question. It's worth whatever, a few $100s, $1,000, whatever it is. You got a quick question, or thousands of dollars, because it could cost you your business. Because think about it. You work your butt off to survive this crisis. And you come out the other side with disgruntled people going, you laid me off because I was X. It wasn't the criteria like they talked about. It wasn't performance-based. It wasn't longevity-based, whatever criteria. It was just, you said, ... would you open yourself for discrimination? Because it's going to happen, because people are going to feel awful. And they're like, it couldn't be my fault. And they're going to see that you survived, and it may become a bigger issue. So I look at attorneys like Robin Chase as insurance. It's the best insurance you're ever going to buy, because versus insurance that you pay for and pray you never use, you're only paying for what you use. And obviously there's a need. And so that's just a 2 cents. If I were you guys on our call, I'd definitely be looking up their law firm.
Thank you, David. We appreciate it. And by the way, we didn't pay David anything for that, but thank you, David. While we've still got some time, I want to turn it over to Rob to talk about the statute that was just passed last night, because I'm sure a lot of you have questions about this. Does it apply to me? What is it? So, Rob, tell us what Congress has been up to.
Sure. And Linza, do we have a FAQ portion? Are we saving some time for that?
Yes.
Okay, well, we may go a tad over. I'll try to hit the highlights of the new law, and then take questions as needed. Okay, passed and signed yesterday. This is the law, for better or worse. It's going to be effective April 2nd, and then it's going to expire at the end of this year. I want to focus on the two main portions of the law that are going to have the biggest effect on you, which is a paid expanded FMLA leave section, and then an emergency paid sick leave section. Both of those are going to apply to all companies with less than 500 employees. The DOL may eventually issue regulations that exempt employers with under 50 employees, but that has not happened yet. We'll be looking for that. With respect to the expanded and paid FMLA section, this is going to cover anyone who's worked for you for at least 30 days. The old FMLA rules, a year of service, does not apply anymore. They narrowed it down. There were various versions that the House passed. The final version, the one that is the law, has been narrowed down. The only eligible reason to take the expanded FMLA leave is to care for a child, a son or daughter whose school or childcare has closed due to the coronavirus. So all the other reasons are out. That's the one reason. As a result of an emergency declaration by the federal, state, or local government. Everyone is dealing with that right now. You probably have a lot of employees who are caring for their children because the schools are closed. What are you required? So if you have that, if people are out because of that reason, what do you have to do? You have to give them 12 weeks of job protected leave. The first 10 days are unpaid. The remainder of the 12 weeks is going to be paid at 2/3 of the regular rate of pay. Assume 40 hours for full-time employees. You look at an average number of hours worked over the past 6 months for part-time employees. It's job protected, so that means you're required to reinstate someone to the same or similar position at the expiration of the leave. There's a minor exception to that for very small, less than 25 employees, employers, if you've reduced operations because of the outbreak. Next, the emergency paid sick leave requirements are different. What they're going to require is 2 weeks of paid sick leave. And again, you're looking at 80 hours for full-time, an equivalent number for part-time. This is for 2 weeks, it's paid at the full regular rate. And there are more reasons that apply here. First, it applies to all employees, even if they haven't worked for you for 30 days. So if you hired someone, 2 weeks ago, it applies to that person. Here's kind of the list of the reasons that are going to trigger this. The employee is quarantined or in self-isolation because of either a government agency, federal, state, local proclamation, or they're self-quarantined because of advice of a doctor, or they're experiencing symptoms of the virus and seeking medical advice, or they're caring for someone who is in quarantine. And lastly, you have the same closure of the school reason. If a child, if they're caring for a son or daughter, again, whose childcare school is closed, then they're going to be eligible. For both of these requirements, there are caps on how much you have to pay per day. There are going to be some tax credits. If you're curious about that, send us a question. We'll do it in the FAQ. As David mentioned, there's probably going to be follow-up stimulus packages. We're monitoring that. We'll see how that plays out. The main thing I've heard is direct relief checks to individuals, but we could be looking at a bailout for the industry. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Rob just said, this is a huge deal for our industry, especially folks that haven't had to deal even with FMLA leave in the past. Because the scope of this is so broad, and it really puts a big burden on employers up front. There are tax credits. The government has said you're going to qualify for tax credits, but they're not talking about direct reimbursements yet. Now, there may be more relief to come, but right now this is a big deal and a big burden when we're dealing with a lot of financial burdens already. And I think the fact that both of these, there's really two parts to this, as Rob said. Paid sick leave and the expanded paid FMLA leave, both of those are going to apply to employees who are staying home caring for their kids whose schools have closed, which is probably most of your employees. So this is a big deal. It's something we're going to be talking a lot about over the next few weeks, and we have a lot of decisions, I think, to make as it relates to this.
Yeah, and we also understand this factors into your decisions on furloughs and closures, right? Can you look through what David is talking about with your 12-week cash flow plan and handle this? So it's something you need to factor in. If y'all have questions about how to calculate the rates of pay, the more kind of technical parts of it, feel free to reach out to us. But kind of the big thing is, 2 weeks of paid leave for many reasons related to coronavirus. And then specifically for people who are caring for their kids right now because of closures, you have essentially 12 weeks, most of which is paid at 2/3 of the regular rate.
That's it for us, but we're happy to take questions. Linz, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so let's see if I can.
I mean, I see one question that popped up, and a lot of folks have this question already. How does this new law apply to folks who've already been laid off? As Rob mentioned earlier, this law doesn't take effect until April 2nd. So technically, it would not apply to individuals who've already been released.
I saw one question pop up. Please repeat the exception for small businesses. So first, for both areas of the law, the paid sick leave and the expanded FMLA leave, the DOL may issue a regulation that exempts employers under 50. Trump has said that he wants that done. He wants it done quickly, is my understanding. So we're looking out for that. Does not apply yet. There was another issue. It's very limited, but in terms of, do we have to, after the 12 weeks is over and someone is saying, I want my job back, at some point during that 12-week process, and okay, your operations are changing, you're already limited staff. Are you required to give them their job back? If you're at less than 25 employees, and you have restructured because of these public emergencies declared in your area and federally, then you may not be required. Now, that said, you still are required once this is over. In theory, there's kind of a provision in there that says once you're back to normal, then you need to reach out to that person. When will we ever be back to normal is hard to say right now.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I saw your question. Good to hear from you. Glad you dialed in. Jennifer's asking about this 500 threshold, and we're getting a lot of questions about that from our larger clients that, who have more than 500 employees and technically aren't subject to this right now. But the question is, how do we calculate the 500? And the answer is it's based on the FMLA's integrated employer test. So maybe you have multiple restaurants or operate multiple hotels, none of which individually have 500 employees and would, in theory, be subject to this act. But if you put them all together, you've got more than 500 as a total enterprise. If you meet the definition of being an integrated employer under the FMLA, then you're going to be exempt from this particular statute. And as we said earlier, we expect more legislation to be forthcoming. There may be some things that target larger employers, but right now this is just 500 or less. And specifically, I was looking to see if I had the test in front of me, but basically it looks at centralized control of labor relations, common management, and common control. So if you've got a home office that manages all these different restaurants or hotels, then you're probably going to be an integrated employer, which we typically don't want, but in this situation is actually a good thing because it means you might be exempt if you've got more than 500 employees in the total enterprise.
And I think this is obviously very novel issues. That I think is a very strong interpretation. If you have a subsidiary that has less than 500, even if the parent company isn't covered, maybe still that subsidiary has to.
Something you need to take a close look at, and we're glad to talk with you further about it as it relates to your specific company.
So, yeah, I saw a couple come up. Okay, we terminated 60 people. Are we required to reinstate them? Okay, the act isn't effective until April 2nd. You terminated them before, they're not covered. So no. Someone asked for a recap of the expanded FMLA. I mean, just let's connect with you afterwards.
You can also go to our website. We've got a good kind of Q&A summary.
Yeah.
That was posted last night. So that's also a good resource. There's a lot of stuff I think we'll see coming online, but we're glad to connect with you and talk with you further about it.
One question I've seen is, okay, we furloughed some employees. Do we need to be paying them? Okay, a very kind of, I think, straightforward common sense answer is layoffs due to reduction in work are not an eligible reason under these statutes. But that said, they're still active employees. And if while they're furloughed, they have one of these issues, they have to start caring for someone, they have to get medical testing, they get quarantined. I think it's an open question that people are discussing right now. I'd like to say no. I'd like to tell you, no, you're not required to pay in that situation. I'm sure plaintiffs' lawyers, will take other positions.
Yeah, and Beverly, I saw your question. Glad to see you on, but I didn't see the whole thing. It was a question about unemployment benefits. And to Rob's point earlier, and maybe Lindsay can read me the whole question, but
it says SCDU is now asking employees to file weekly for its employees. What if we already told our employees to file individually?
If you've already told them to file individually and then they file, that's fine. I mean, I would probably call SCDW and say, here's what we've already done. Chances are the employees have already filed claims, so they may not want that additional administrative burden of having you do the same thing. So at this point, I wouldn't be too concerned about that.
I think that's all the questions we have in the chat box right now.
Actually, we skipped one, Lindsay.
Oh.
It's the 7-day notice is required for employees who have a change in a pay rate only, or also change in hours.
Change in hours too. Less people recognize that, but yes, that does apply.
Yeah, technically it does.
Okay. Any other questions we can answer after the call? The help desk can be found on our website for Jackson Lewis. It's a membership benefit for SCRLA members to have that 10-minute free consultation with Rob and Chase. If you have any questions for the Restaurant and Lodging Association directly, please email me and I'll forward all of this information out with a recap of the webinar and the slide deck as well. But we appreciate all of y'all joining us this morning, and hopefully this information was beneficial for each of y'all. So thank y'all.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Hang in there. Take care.
Yep.